So this last bit I'm going to finish up on is called My Sociology Professor Told Me. And, that's kind of a joke because I think in many ways economics and sociology might tackle the same topics, but with a very different methodology and very different bias that they come at it with. And I'm not saying that sociology is less valid than economics or vice versa, but I do want to kind of frame the debate and kind of give you a general kind of critique of economics and in particular microeconomics that you can kind of just keep in the background of your mind when you're going through some of these, kind of abstracted models that you'll learn in, Micro 1. So a lot of people, when they're taking economics, they take the first class. They don't take any other further. They don't take economics any further. And they think, oh, I've learned economics. I'm now well-versed to talk about everything. And, that's not how life works. You lift a weight, that doesn't mean you're Arnold Schwarzenegger. So a lot of people will, for better or worse, a lot of people will say, okay, I know economics. I know how economists think. Either they'll take this out to being, I'm therefore qualified to critique everything about economics because their assumptions and their abstractions are so unrealistic, or they might take it the other way and say, oh, this isn't grounded in economics. I took Micro 1. I know I'm the expert now. And they'll come up with something that actually won't hold up outside of, your Micro 1 class, which, in the context of economics, is very important that you take this class because you're not going to be able to take a higher level of economics without first getting the concepts down. But you have to also understand that what I'm presenting you here is a very stylized version of economics. In order to talk about things that are more complicated, you need like a much broader and much more well-defined skill set, and nobody ever gets that in the first class. So, take everything I say with a grain of salt. There are good economists out there doing great work, but none of them stopped at Econ 101, and any detractor who has only taken Econ 101 and isn't really versed in the field is not going to really understand what they're critiquing, even though some of the critiques are valid in my opinion. All right, so let's step through some of these critiques that you might hear. Okay, number 1, econ answers the same questions as sociology, just in an inaccessible way. What do I mean by that? So if you read an economics paper in 2020, like an academic economics paper, something that's published in a journal by a PhD in econ, what you'll get is very quantitative, right? And I've kind of stressed this a lot. It'll be quantitative, but in a way that if you're not an economist, like you can go through 6 years of your doctorate and still not understand the baseline model if you're not in that particular subfield of econ. And you might get it, but it might take a couple hours of just, solving through that model to get it, which is hard. They're right. It's a little less accessible than, picking up a sociology journal, which, is written in plain English versus economics being written in the language of math. But the common language of math also allows for translation across fields. So, it's tough to be an international trade economist and then pick up a macro paper and, expect to get it immediately. But, once you solve through the model, not only do you get it intimately. You get it, right? Contrast that with sociology, where there are certain keywords and certain buzzwords that they'll be like, okay, well, if you haven't read Marx Das Kapital chapter 8, you won't understand this. If you haven't read Lacan, you won't understand this. In that way, sociology can be every bit as inaccessible to a common reader, though I do think that quantitative, like quantitative logic is maybe more difficult to grasp in general than living with Lacan or living with Marx and understanding the text as it speaks to you. It depends. It depends on how right brain versus left brain you are, so to speak. Okay, so next up, economics makes absurd assumptions about human behavior. Yeah, that is correct. That is, I would say, true. In the sense of economics assumes that everybody's going to be rationally self-interested and self-interested according to the abstractions that you as the economist have made. So if you're looking at a model of businesses, you're assuming, one, that the business knows the demand and supply curves. 2, that they're going to price according to it. 3, that the consumers are going to act according to the price signal. 4, that the ultimate motive of the business is to make money. Whereas, that's probably true, but many businesses might have other motives, and maybe short-term profit might not always be the motive either. But if you're assuming, a supply and demand curve, what you're basically saying is that the economy is going to fit exactly this model where price is going to center in on, one price and quantity is going to center on one quantity, and there's no real way around it. And economists kind of know that. Like, we know what our assumptions are. We know when our assumptions are getting out of hand. Sometimes economists don't do anything about it, but they know ultimately how rational and how built on, like how well thought out their assumptions are. And it's just a matter of finding that balance between abstraction. So in many cases, it doesn't matter whether you assume that businesses are rational or not, because overall, it might be the case that the market is acting as though it's rational. Businesses might have another motive. They might have, some social motive or some branding motive or some marketing motive that has nothing to do with, the supply and demand price that you're given. They might offer a ridiculous price, and might actually make sense even if it's not easily captured by an economics model. And that's fair. That'll happen, but you have to consider that economists are thinking human beings, and we also know that. And when we see that our model doesn't hold up to scrutiny and our assumptions don't hold up to scrutiny, we'll adjust that. It's often the case that if we haven't made that adjustment, it's because it's kind of technically difficult to do. Making less abstractions, like reducing the number of abstractions and the number of assumptions, can make a paper very difficult to actually solve. And that's not really an excuse. When that happens, though, I think what a good economist should do is they should step in and say, okay, look, this paper presents a model, and the model has stylized assumptions, but here's how it actually might play out in real life. Here's where the model might fail. And this is ultimately why the data isn't corroborating the story. But I guess if your data is not corroborating the story, you really shouldn't be publishing at all. So if the data matches the model and the model is not too stylized, it should say something meaningful about the market or the economy or whatever you're looking at. But that said, yeah, we do have unrealistic assumptions. I actually make this claim often about macroeconomics. I think that even if macro can generate some useful results in terms of coming up with decent policy, the assumptions are very stylized in the sense of the more specific the policy recommendation that you want to make is, the less I am willing to trust it. Because macro rightfully so, is a very large field, and they're asking very big questions, and you're going to have to make kind of big assumptions to answer those big questions. But for me personally, I always look at macro papers with a grain of salt, even when they're done by great macroeconomists. It's just skepticism I have. So always, when you're looking at a macro paper, you're thinking about a micro econ paper, not just macro. When you're thinking about an econ topic, question what the assumptions behind the topic are. If they're talking about consumer behavior and they're not factoring in irrationality, that's an issue. If your assumptions don't match your prescriptions, the things that you're making a statement about, then that's something that you should definitely think critically about. But it's not that economists don't know it. It's just sometimes we just have to stylize a little bit in order to say something useful. So we relax our assumptions when necessary is another way of saying that. And I would think, or I would hope, that a good economist can recognize an unreasonable assumption. And if they can't, then their peers who are reviewing them can. And if they can't, then the people they're presenting the paper to should. But sometimes bad papers do go through. It just is. And that's every field. The other thing is we're very upfront about our abstractions and biases. Certain assumptions that are common in econ might not get stated directly in the paper just because they're so they're so frequent that if they're not there, it's more of a story. But in general, you'll see assumption 1, assumption 2, assumption 3, assumption 4 laid out before the model is presented. And that way, when the model is generated, when they solve the model, you see exactly where every single variable is coming from. So in that sense, if there's a bias, it's very clearly stated. The bias is that the consumers are going to act rationally, might be a bias, or the bias is that the business is going to price according to profit maximization principles rather than social principles, or rather than the CEO just doesn't know how to price accurately. Those biases will be stated up front, and where they're not, it's just because they're so common that you'll see them. You'll know that they're there. By bias, I'm saying assumption. I mean assumption, not bias in this case. Yeah. Okay, next bit. Economics is justified. Pick your policy, which was detrimental. Again, that's a fair critique. Economics is an evolving field. It's not immune to saying something and then we later find out that it's wrong. That said, you're not going to throw out science because at one point we believed that the sun revolved around the earth, right? Economics has had its times where the policy prescriptions have been pretty bad, but it's also, an evolving field. Science is the same way. You're not going to say that, I don't know, you can stop germs via miasma, an old theory that existed in the 1500s, right? Like, you don't just throw away a field and a method of science, like a scientific method, which economics is at least, trying to become in the way that it's scrutinized, even if it's a social science, just because at some point the science wasn't exactly great. There's always progress to be made, even when fields are still developing, and economics is a young field relative to physics or chemistry. But even when there's progress to be made, that's not a reason to throw away the field. If anything, it's a reason to get into the field and to learn more and to better it. Because there comes a time where Like if you're entering too late into the field, research papers are few and far between, which I think is kind of where it's at now. But like, if you have a good idea and you think you can do better, do better. Do that idea. Don't just sit in the sidelines and say, "Oh, this is stupid," you know. So at any rate, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. If econ has justified a policy that was bad, and a lot of times it has, that doesn't mean that economics as a science is bad. It just means that there's work to do and that you could be the one doing it. Policymakers often cherry pick what they want to hear. Yes. So oftentimes when you have bad economic policy, it's not always exactly what the economists are saying that's off. It's what the policymakers are saying. Policymakers will pick and choose whatever gets them elected. So good economic policy might be thrown out so that there's like a nice, neat soundbite that a politician can get voted based on. This might be a controversial pick, but I think this was the case in the 80s. There was this idea called supply side economics, which was popular among maybe five well-known economists and not much else. And the idea was that if you decrease taxes on like the 1%, say, if you decrease taxes on the 1%, the 1% will then invest into the stock market, and that means that businesses are getting more money, businesses are going to invest in employees, employees are getting more money, employees are going to spend more into the overall economy, and it's going to create a positive feedback loop. That is not good economics, and most economists will say that there's what's called the marginal propensity to save and a marginal propensity to consume. And probably for the 1%, the marginal propensity to save is higher because they have less living expenses. So in that sense, for the 1%, if you give them $100, they might save $99 and spend $1. Whereas if you give, the bottom 20% $100, they'll probably end up spending 99 to 100 of that dollars to make ends meet, and that'll almost immediately get spent into the economy, which then will help your business owners and kind of create that the positive feedback loop that the supply side or trickle down economics were kind of gearing for. Not only that, but giving a poor person $100 has an immediate effect on that. You're also increasing the overall utility of the poor person. Again, one of the standard economic ideas is something called diminishing marginal utility, where if I have $0 and I go to $100, that means I can eat, 20 meals. But if I have $1 million and you give me $100, that $100, I might not even register that it's there. So the $100 going to the poor person who has nothing in their pockets, in terms of overall utility, will be more maximizing, more optimal. That said, there's also philosophic, like this also starts sputtering into normative territory when you start talking like that, because if presumably you're taking money from someone in order to give to that poor person. So there's, normative questions there about, is that just or not? But at any rate, if the goal was to increase overall spending in the economy, trickle down economics was not very effective in doing so. That's a positive statement. Trickle down economics did not reach the goal of getting to this positive feedback loop that it said it would. And, skeptical me, and even people at the time were skeptical. Even so, this is a policy associated mostly with the Reagan administration. But even Reagan's own vice president, who was running against him in the 1982 election, I was right. The 1980 election. I'm an idiot. Even Reagan's own, at the time, opponent, George H.W. Bush, in the 1980 primary, called it voodoo economics because it wasn't very well founded even at the time. But they picked it because Reagan and his advisors picked it because it sounded nice and it played well to their base who didn't believe in the normative question of redistribution. So they wanted a positive answer to that, something that they can say, oh, well, actually, not only are we solving the normative problem, but we're actually making life better for poor people as well, which didn't turn out to be true, and they probably knew about it. So in that sense, yeah, policymakers can pick and choose what they want to hear or what their voters want to hear so that they can justify kind of their already existing political opinions. And I just spent a while talking about Ronald Reagan, but it happens on both sides. I don't like the phrase both sides, actually. It happens on all sides because both sides is reductive. There's more than just two ways to approach an issue. Keep that in mind. Not everything's liberal or conservative. Some things fall in between, some things fall above, some things fall below. That's a very reductive way of looking at the world. At any rate, that's an aside. Policymakers might use bad economics to justify a policy, so don't always pin that on the econ guys, even though sometimes it might be them too. One thing I will say is that economics does default to what's called utilitarianism, and this is a philosophy. Utilitarianism is a school of philosophy that kind of developed around the exact same time that early economics was developing. So you had these guys, John Stuart Mill and Jeremy Bentham, both of which are considered philosophers and both of which are considered economists, like some of the early economists. And their idea was that you can almost generate an equation to maximize happiness. And if that sounds familiar, it's because I've kind of talked about things like that. I've talked about maximizing utility is the actual economics jargon for that. The economic slang that we use is maximizing utility. Well, what does that sound like? That sounds like utilitarianism. The idea is you create an equation that will maximize the overall happiness for society as a whole. And there's a philosophical underpinning where it's like you can do that, but the counterpoint is, and it sounds nice, but the counterpoint is, does the end justify the means? So, imagine you have a society of like 100 people, right? So let's say 100 people. Okay. And you have little Johnny over here. Johnny. Let's say Johnny is like a 15-year-old boy or something. Johnny is a 15-year-old boy. And this society not only believes in ritual sacrifice, but Zeus came down and said, hey, I want you to sacrifice Johnny and I'll give you good harvest for the rest of your life. Okay? Zeus wants Johnny to be sacrificed. Okay? To the utilitarian, this is a no-brainer. Okay, the utilitarian's going to see this and say, all right, Johnny's got to go. 100 other people are going to have a better life. There's going to be no starvation, no death from that. Why shouldn't we kill Johnny? Right? That's a utilitarian way of looking at it. It's okay to sacrifice this person in order to make the whole better off. you are maximizing societal well-being, even though you're taking away Johnny's well-being. Okay, and you can model that in economics with the utility function. However, there's other ways to think about this problem. Like, to me, I would never let this dude be sacrificed. I would never kill Johnny, even if it means, 2 people in society end up starving. Because it's not, in my opinion, in my, philosophic background or whatever, and, this is normative, it's all opinion. But in my opinion, it's not okay to kill Johnny actively in order to make other people's lives better off, even if that means other people end up dying. That's more of a rights-based approach. It's what you call deontological, where things are right or wrong, actions are right or wrong because they're right or wrong, and that sounds kind of stupid. I get it, but I don't believe that you should just be able to trample on someone's rights in order to make someone else better off. I think everybody is their own agent and a being in themselves, like a thing in themselves, an end in themselves, so that if you take away that person's agency and their rights in order to make the other people better off, that is a worse thing to do than the utilitarian approach of or it's a worse thing to do than figuring out some other way to get a better harvest. Okay, I think that in the long run, these rights-based approaches tend to be more just and better for society. But again, to me, that is an opinion. You can disagree, and I can argue till I'm blue in the face, but it's a normative question. But at any rate, all I'm saying with this whole bullet point is I just presented you 2 ways of thinking about a distribution question. Do we save Johnny and we don't take his life and we let society kind of reap their harvest as is, or do we take Johnny's life and give society better harvest? Two valid approaches depending on your philosophical background, but economics, unless you tailor it in particular ways, will default to the utilitarianism position where a good macroeconomist will take the utility function for the 100 people and add it to Johnny's utility function and have 101 utility functions, and they'll just sum up which one leads to the total the most happiness across society. And you could tweak that utility function. You could take away, you can make it so that if you take Johnny's life, Johnny's got infinitely negative utility. And in that way, then you can get back to the other philosophical side of things. But that's not really the standard approach for economics and economists. If you're looking at that, you're looking specifically for that, and it's not always going to happen. So oftentimes that might lead to distributional questions that are either unjust on the deontological side, the side that says you can't take away from someone in order to give to someone else, or it might lead to things that are unjust on the utilitarian side or I shouldn't say on the utilitarian side, but things that are unjust for like a minority, and I'm not using minority in the sense of, POC, I'm using minority in the sense of, if you were to aggregate all utility functions, people whose utility functions are weighted less because they show up less frequent. You could justify a policy that's hard on them or unfair to them. But that I even though I made the qualification that might not mean minorities in the sense of POC, but it oftentimes in history it has. So at any rate, all this to say, economics and utilitarianism developed at the same time, and they use a lot of the same language, And I don't even think most economists are aware that that's the case, because most economists are just thinking about the math. Even if they are thinking about the distributional consequences of it, it's not usually presented as, oh, it's distributionally problematic because there's a utilitarian background to it. Okay, I think that's everything. All right, so that's the end of the lecture. If you have any questions, shoot me an email. So far, I've gotten logistical questions about, the textbook and everything, but now that there's actual material for you to digest and, think about, I'm more than happy to, and I'm very eager to, see how you guys are thinking about the material. It's actually really challenging for me to, present these 3-hour lectures, in these little bits here and there, because it's not the same when there's not people asking questions, and it's kind of boring for me, honestly. I want active questions, and you can shoot them in an email, and if your questions I think are something that's worth talking about, I'll throw them in a discussion thread, and you guys can shoot the shit. I don't have any issues like moderating something in addition if you guys had questions. If you wanted to ask, oh, well, I hadn't really thought about utilitarianism before. Nobody's told me about utilitarianism before. The utilitarianism is like the Thanos philosophy, whereas like deontological, like we don't trade lives, is like the Captain American philosophy, right? I should have said that 20 minutes ago when I was explaining the beginning of it. But so who did that work out for, or for whom did that work out? Because we don't trade lives, says Captain America, and then all the Wakandans end up dying. So like, yeah, Captain America. Nah, but I digress. Also R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman. That's crazy. Anyway, again, I digress. I feel a little bit more relaxed because I've just recorded probably about 4 hours worth of lectures that I've cut down to 3. Sorry about this lecture format in general. It's hard for me to just like speak into the camera, but hopefully you guys are getting it. And anytime that you're not, just shoot me an email. I will jump on the phone if it's after business hours. I do have a day job, but I will jump on the phone and I will explain this to you, or I can jump on a Zoom call. I love economics. I left grad school, but I never stopped, learning. And and it's not just economics. I love philosophy. I love history. I love, just thinking about like political science and all this. Like, if you have any questions, I am a very eager teacher. I love teaching, and I'm more than happy to talk until your ears fall off. So, hit me up. Like I said, it's not as interactive as I'd like it to be, but that is kind of the hand we're dealt. And I'm barred from giving like physical Zoom classes as a mandatory thing, so I don't think it's fair to have my lectures be presented as Zoom classes. So, that just is what it is. But like I said, feel free to come to me. If I see a good question, I can either put it on the discussion board, I can record a video and throw it up online too. Just let me know. Anyway, have a good week. I'll actually be recording lecture 2 probably on Wednesday. So be on the lookout for that. Otherwise, I look forward to hearing from you guys. All right. Oh, one other thing. I'm going to be traveling from Thursday, September 4th, I believe it is, until probably sometime in the 11th. So it's Thursday, September 3rd to about the 11th. I will be reachable by email, but I will be kind of delayed. So just keep that in mind. At any rate, I'll put an announcement on that. All right. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.